It's been no secret that the PlayStation 4 has become a powerhouse for exclusive games this generation. Honestly, Sony has been doing a phenomenal job for a while now with their first-party studios and partnerships dating back to the PlayStation 3, or really even before that. But they really have stepped up their game even further this generation with high-production games and even beyond just their AAA games. With that said, I thought I'd put a list together of PlayStation 4's 25 best exclusive games. Now, this does include a few console exclusives, as they may be available through PC, whether that be downloadable or streamed via PlayStation Now. This list also does not include PlayStation VR titles, as I have an entirely separate list for just that. So if you are interested in PlayStation VR games, you can go check out that list as well. As always, I'll only be including one game per franchise unless they're vastly different. And if I do miss one of your favorite games, let me know in the comments below so others can discover it as well. But with all that said, let's get right into it. At number 25, we have Resogun, which was actually one of the first PlayStation 4 games on the market. And even after all these years, Resogun still remains as one of the best PlayStation 4 exclusive games, and while it may look simple on the surface, it's an incredibly addictive game. Resogun gives you one task: to save the humans, and because Resogun encourages you to play fast by having your score multiplier increase as you destroy your enemies, and decrease if you don't do something for 5 seconds, it becomes a rewarding and addictive shoot-'em-up game. MLB The Show may not be for everybody, but if you love the American pastime baseball, then MLB The Show is the best of its kind. There isn't really a lot of competition in this area, but MLB The Show remains the highest of quality for any baseball fan. Over the years, we've seen games lean more towards the artistic side of things, and Bound is one of the prime examples for this. The moment you turn it on, you're sucked into a beautiful world that will leave you mesmerized, and even though it's kind of a simplistic 3D platformer, its take on the genre is unique, and that's what makes Bound so special. It's not going to go down as the best 3D platformer ever, but it's an experience that stays with you as you dance and glide through this fun but short game. On paper, Days Gone sounds like the ever-popular series The Walking Dead, but instead of calling the very obvious zombies walkers, they instead call them freakers. Instead of having Biker Daryl, you have Biker Deacon. It is a zombie apocalypse, but being in a big open world with huge hordes of zombies chasing you, which really is a technical achievement once you actually see this in motion. It is what separates itself, and even though it has a few issues, it's a franchise that has a lot of potential if they decide to do a sequel. Back when the PlayStation 3 released, Little Big Planet was actually one of my favorite games on the platform for its charming characters, world, and even its floaty platforming. It's just a fun and cute game that constantly will have you smiling. Now this time around, developer Media Molecule didn't make Little Big Planet, but instead it was developed by Sumo Digital. They brought some fresh characters to the game, introducing new mechanics, and overall it lives up to the legacy of Little Big Planet. It may be a little rough around the edges at times, but it's still the same old Little Big Planet that we have come to know and love. Concrete Genie is actually the newest game to appear on this list. It's both creative and artistic, but it does do a good job at telling a story about an abandoned town, with a kid who will paint it back to life while being chased around by a bunch of bullies. The painting mechanic itself is what makes this game so unique, and you don't have to be an artist to have your creations and your genies to come to life. While the first half of the game is almost a stress-free game, it's the second half that opens up into a more beat-em-up style of a game. If you haven't seen this game yet, do yourself a favor, and you might want to go check it out yourself. Speaking of Media Molecule earlier, Tearaway Unfolded in many ways has continued the artistic and charming vision of Little Big Planet. This time, instead of a 2D platformer though, you have a 3D platforming world booming with artistic vision and creativity. There's no single game on this list, or maybe at all, that takes advantage of the DualShock controller quite the way Tearaway does. At times, you may have to use your light on the controller to shine the game, while others it asks you to use a touchpad to cut out a shape. Tearaway Unfolded is completely unique to its own, and if you're craving a 3D platformer, then Tearaway Unfolded may be worth a look. The horror genre can tend to be very niche. Not everybody likes to be scared, but for those who love horror games may end up falling in love with Until Dawn, which plays out much like you would expect a horror movie too. It's almost as if you're in a movie, making all the decisions which can have consequences, and all of the silly tropes that you would come to expect in a horror movie. Even with that said, it is one of the best horror games in years. The legendary Gran Turismo franchise is back once again on the PlayStation 4, and like many Gran Turismo games, you can once again expect one of the best racing simulation experiences on the market. This hasn't changed after all of these years, but in Gran Turismo Sport, they did change focus to a more online experience, which one thing I do want to note here is how they reward you for driving a clean race. Meaning that if you don't try to bump into other online players, you will then be matched up with other players who also try to race cleanly. This is such a nice touch, and because it's an online experience, Gran Turismo Sport continues to grow even today. When Gravity 2 first released, I was a little weary of it considering I wanted it on the PlayStation Vita. But Gravity Rush 2 did take full control of the PlayStation 4 and improved itself in almost every way. The combat is better, the world offers even more exploration, and it's just a bigger game overall. It still has just as a unique art style as it ever did, and it pops off the screen even more with the extra power that the PlayStation 4 offers. And then there's the collectathon aspect that Gravity Rush offers, and it's just as addicting as it ever was as you manipulate gravity to rise and fall to collect every crystal across the world. I think Ratchet & Clank is about as close as I've ever seen a game to getting to Pixar game graphics. This game is absolutely gorgeous to watch in motion, both in terms of gameplay or with its cutscenes. The game itself is also fun and frantic, offering that gadget-based gameplay that Insomniac is so well known for, as you swap to different weapons that all offer their own unique style and flair. See, Ratchet & Clank isn't just about defeating your enemies, but instead it's about defeating your enemies in the most fun and stylish way that you can think of. It also has fun platforming, and this game is just great for all gamers at any age. In most superhero games, you're set on a very linear path to be told a story, but something that infamous Second Son does so different is let you take control of a superhuman and then let you make the choices that you want. This means that not only can you be a superhero that saves the world, but you also have a choice to become a supervillain that destroys the world. It's a very interesting take on the genre, and Second Son does this brilliantly with a good cast of characters, a memorable story, and a ton of fun superpowers to save or wreak havoc with. Two of my favorite games ever made are Ico and Shadow of the Colossus, so when The Last Guardian was first announced, I was more than just a little excited. Sadly, I had to wait for years after the initial announcement for the PlayStation 3, but luckily, it was well worth the wait. Sure, The Last Guardian has a few technical issues, and you can end up battling with the AI on more than a few occasions, but it's the world and Trico that you'll fall in love with as you solve several clever puzzles and navigate the castle. It's a beautiful game in terms of its story, and like the other installments in the franchise, the ending and the experiences that you come across throughout The Last Guardian will stay with you for years. It truly is a one-of-a-kind game. There's a reason that the fighting game community loves Street Fighter so much, and it goes beyond just its rich history. It's the mechanics and how the game actually works. It's a fighting game that asks you to know the fundamentals and learn how to play in neutral. It also allows you to be creative in your own unique combos, and then the characters are just so memorable. It's such a great fighting game franchise, and Street Fighter V is no different. Detroit Become Human is often criticized for maybe overdoing its narrative, but don't let that fool you because this is actually a very good game. It's one of the most stunning games to look at, with phenomenal acting, and the stories are, in my opinion, very good as well. The quick time events might be a little too much for some people, but if you're okay with those, then Detroit Become Human is well worth your time. Over the years, we've had several Dark Souls clones, most of which ends up failing in comparison. Nioh, though, is an exception to this rule. While yes, it obviously takes inspiration from the very popular Souls franchise, it also carves out its own unique place in gaming with its deep combat system, over-the-top story, and the design for the monsters is brilliantly done. If you like the Souls franchise even just slightly, I can't recommend Nioh enough. Yakuza has quickly climbed in popularity in recent years, and that's because it's well deserved. And even though the franchise is over a decade old, it's very much new to many people. So I think Yakuza 0 is the best place to start, considering it takes place before the first Yakuza game. Not only does it have a good story, but its over-the-top combat with street fights and the wide variety of activities you can do within the city is just staggering. As I said earlier, Shadow of the Colossus is one of my favorite games ever made. There's something about the atmosphere, and it's haunting, but with a beautiful story that stays with you for years and years. The moment you climb your first Colossus creature to slay it is exhilarating, but at the same time, it's emotionally draining. I really can't say enough good stuff about Shadow of Colossus, and it's visually more impressive than ever before. This is a must-buy if you've never played it before. The Last of Us is honestly a masterpiece in terms of storytelling within video games. From the very first moment that you play The Last of Us, you know it's going to be a good game, as it's brilliantly told. It's a dark world where zombie-like creatures are taking over, and its characters must find a way to survive. Sure, it doesn't really sound all that original, but its story is just heads and shoulders above the competition. And I also have to say, its gunplay is very solid as well. When I first saw Horizon Zero Dawn, I fell in love with the design of its beautiful world. Not just because it's one of the most impressive games to look at, because it is, but the world is fascinating with a prehistoric setting, but also with its dino robots. It's a mix of two very fascinating settings, and Guerrilla Games pulled it off. It's a fun open world game with an interesting story and fun RPG mechanics. I personally think that Persona 4 Golden is the best JRPG game that I've ever played. So when I say I was excited for Persona 5, that is an understatement. This game out of the gate was impressive with its art style and just how stylish it was. This time around though, I do think the story can be a bit of a slog with being over 100 hours long, but with that said, I think there is a very real debate on Persona 5 being the best JRPG game. It has a good story with some good twists, and the gameplay itself is probably the best in the franchise, along with the well-crafted dungeons. As long as you're okay with the slow points in the game, Persona 5 is a must-have. Some games try to tell you a story, or have top-notch production values, but Bloodborne is a game without all the extras. It's just a game through and through, and that alone is both addictive and rewarding. Bloodborne's world is both grotesque and haunting, but it's the gameplay that is so alluring. It's a little bit faster paced than the Dark Souls franchise, but just as challenging if not more. The character design, the bosses, and the level design is about as perfect as I can ask a game to be. The only issues I can really point out about Bloodborne is its long load screens and its poor frame rate, but it's about a perfect game beyond that. Spider-Man is a character that almost anybody will know, whether that be for comic books, movies, shows, merchandise, or video games. But what if I told you that Insomniac's Spider-Man game was the best Spider-Man out of them all? Because yes, I do believe that. This game has an amazing story, with well-crafted characters that are faithful to the original, and the gameplay is nothing short of a fun masterpiece as you swing across the city, and use several gadgets to defeat your enemies. This is not just the best Spider-Man, but the best superhero game ever made. Uncharted has been one of the most influential games of the last decade. I mean, if you really think about it, it has pushed the game industry into a different direction, in which invites games to be more similar to movies, with set action pieces, good acting, and a mix of shooting along with puzzles and platforming. It, however, never sacrifices the gameplay in order to make a good story, but rather the cinematics aids a good game. There's a balance to be had here, and I think Uncharted 4 is among the best in the franchise. You go back to revisit Nathan Drake's childhood and learn a little bit more about his solemn past, while also connecting with the present-day characters in several emotional moments. Storytelling doesn't get much better than in the Uncharted franchise, but never in sacrifice of its gameplay. I'm going to say right now, I was never a big fan of the original God of War trilogy. While yes, they were great games in their own right, they never really blew me away either. With that said, I think God of War for the PlayStation 4 is the best single-player experience that I've ever had. Not only is the story among the best in all video games with fantastic characters, writing, and production value, the gameplay feels perfect to me. I'm not trying to exaggerate this at all, but as of this video, I genuinely believe that God of War is the best single-player experience in video games right now, with both top-of-its-class beat-em-up gameplay, with light RPG mechanics, and one of the best written stories ever in video game history. Anyways though, that is it for this video, but if I forgot to mention any of your favorites, let me know in the comments below so others can discover those as well. And if you like this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and bell notification button. Peace out!